Welcome back to Sleepy Saga Histories, where quiet stories from long ago are told by firelight to help you drift away. Tonight, you'll journey through a forgotten moment in time, a soft thread in the fabric of ancient life, slow and unhurried. Let the day fall away, your breath slow, and if this story keeps you company, you're always welcome back to the fire. In the heart of ancient Rome, amid the marble columns and echoing forums, the divine was everywhere. The gods of Rome were not distant beings, locked away in heavenly realms, but active participants in daily life, in every decision, every harvest, every oath, every birth. For the Romans, religion was not separate from the state or the home. It was the very framework upon which civilization was built. At the top of this divine hierarchy stood Jupiter, king of the gods. Originally equated with the Greek Zeus, Jupiter came to embody Roman power, authority, and protection. His temple on the Capitoline Hill was among the most sacred places in all of Rome. Every consul took office with sacrifices in his name. His epithets, Jupiter Optimus Maximus, Jupiter Tonans, Jupiter Stator, reflect how the Romans saw him, as the best and greatest, the bringer of thunder, the one who stays the flight of armies. His statue watched over the city from above, lightning bolt in hand, a reminder that Rome's destiny was protected by the heavens. Beside him stood his wife and sister, Juno. As Juno Regina, she was queen of the gods but also protector of the Roman people, particularly women. Juno Lucina watched over childbirth. Juno Moneta gave her name to the mint, where coins were struck under her protection. Her influence extended into war and politics, love and fertility. She was revered not just as consort, but as a powerful goddess in her own right. Their daughter Minerva completed what the Romans called the Capitoline Triad: Jupiter, Juno, and Minerva. Borrowed from Greek Athena, Minerva was goddess of wisdom, crafts, and strategy. Her festivals included Quinquatria, celebrated in March by artists, teachers, and doctors. Though less militaristic than her Greek counterpart, she was no less vital. Temples to Minerva stood across Rome, each one a quiet tribute to learning and order. Then there was Mars, god of war, blood and valour. But unlike the Greek Ares, Mars was not feared and marginalised. He was honoured, respected, even loved. To the Romans, Mars represented the disciplined warrior, the defender of the state. As the supposed father of Romulus and Remus, he held a special place in Rome's mythical past. His sacred animals, the wolf and the woodpecker, appear in countless legends. In March and October, priests known as the Salii dance through the streets with shields and chants, honouring Mars and asking for his blessing on the armies. The month of March itself was named after him, marking the traditional start of the military campaigning season. Venus, goddess of love, beauty, and fertility, held a different kind of power. Originally a minor agricultural spirit, Venus grew in prominence under Greek influence and Roman ambition. By the late Republic, she was claimed as the divine ancestor of the Julian family, including Julius Caesar himself. Temples to Venus Genetrix and Venus Victrix tied her to both motherhood and conquest. Her seductive power, both creative and destructive, was seen as a fundamental force of the cosmos. These five gods, Jupiter, Juno, Minerva, Mars, and Venus, form the backbone of Rome's divine pantheon. Their names appeared on altars, coins, and battle standards. Their stories were told in festivals and rituals, woven into the mythic tapestry of the empire. But they were only the beginning. the Romans' divinity was not confined to Olympus or the Capitoline. It filled the streets, the hearth, the fields, and the shadows. Beyond the major deities stood hundreds of others, gods of doorways, gods of grain, gods of boundaries and beginnings. Roman religion was not about faith in the modern sense, but about action, tradition, and reciprocity. The gods gave, and the people gave back. Beyond the central gods of the Capitoline and Rome's mythic founders, the pantheon of major deities extended into every aspect of Roman life and empire. Chief among them was Apollo, one of the few gods adopted directly from the Greek world without a change in name. Apollo was the god of prophecy, music, healing, and the sun. His worship was less ancient in Roman tradition, but grew steadily, particularly after the Second Punic War. Augustus, the first emperor, adopted Apollo as a personal patron, building a magnificent temple to him on the Palatine Hill. To associate oneself with Apollo was to align with order, civilization, and clarity, a message that the emperor wished to project across the empire. Apollo's twin sister was Diana, goddess of the hunt, the moon, and wild nature. She was revered by rural folk, hunters, and women, particularly in matters of childbirth and independence. The great sanctuary of Diana at Lake Nemi outside of Rome was among the most mysterious of her cults, and its priesthood was bound by ancient, violent traditions. To the Romans, Diana was a figure of beauty and autonomy, a divine presence in forests and moonlit groves, fierce and untamed. Vulcan, or Vulcanus, god of fire, volcanoes, and metalworking, was both feared and honoured. Blacksmiths revered him, but so too did soldiers and city magistrates, for fire could both create and destroy. Each year, Romans celebrated the Vulcanalia, offering sacrifices to prevent devastating fires in the dry August heat. Vulcan's forge was imagined beneath Mount Etna or in the heart of the earth, a place of sparks, anvils, and divine craftsmanship. Neptune, god of the sea, was the Roman equivalent of the Greek Poseidon, though his worship was more subdued in early Roman religion, given the city's inland location. However, as Rome became a naval power, Neptune's importance rose. He was invoked by sailors, generals, and merchants. Statues and tridents were placed near ports, and sacrifices made to ensure safe passage across the waves. Neptune also had ties to horses and earthquakes, earning him a place among the unpredictable gods whose power had to be respected, if not fully understood. Ceres, goddess of agriculture and grain, was vital to Rome's survival. Her cult was rooted in the life-giving cycles of sowing and harvest. The Cerealia, her festival, involved games, offerings, and the release of foxes with burning torches tied to their tails, a mysterious rite possibly symbolising the burning away of blight. Alongside Ceres, the figures of Tellus, Mother Earth, and Liber and Libera represented fertility, planting, and renewal. Ceres was especially venerated by the plebeians, the common people whose food security depended on a stable grain supply. Mercury, swift-footed and clever, was the god of trade, thieves, travellers, and messages. He wore winged sandals and carried a caduceus, and was believed to escort souls to the underworld. To merchants and businessmen, Mercury was a friendly god, one who brought luck in negotiation and speed in transaction. His temples were often located near markets and crossroads, where his influence guided not only physical movement, but the exchange of goods and information. Bacchus, or Dionysus to the Greeks, brought wine, ecstasy, and madness. Though originally distrusted by Roman authorities, Bacchus's cult grew in secret until the Senate attempted to suppress it in the 2nd century BCE, fearing its unregulated rites and nighttime gatherings. Still, Bacchus persisted. He came to symbolise not only pleasure and intoxication, but the emotional and spiritual release that structured Roman religion often lacked. His influence endured in festivals and banquets, especially during the Saturnalia and other winter feasts. Finally, Vesta, the goddess of the hearth and sacred flame, held a unique position. Her shrine in the Roman Forum housed an eternal fire tended by the Vestal Virgins, a group of priestesses sworn to chastity and service. Vesta's flame symbolised the continuity of Rome itself. As long as it burned, the city endured. Her rituals were quiet, domestic, deeply traditional. To lose Vesta's flame was to risk divine displeasure and social unravelling. These gods were not abstract myths to the Romans. They were living forces, embedded in public ceremony and private ritual. They were enshrined in marble and imagined in clouds. Each had their festival days, their sacred animals, their priesthoods, their temples. Roman religion was at its core about maintaining a divine order, a pax deorum, or peace of the gods. It was this cosmic contract that governed Rome's success and failures alike. Beyond the grand temples and state rituals dedicated to the major gods, Roman religion extended into every corner of daily existence. The Romans believed the divine was not confined to the heavens, but woven into the very walls of their homes, the thresholds of their doorways, and the fields where their food grew. These were the domestic and local gods, the spirits and minor deities who governed the rhythms of ordinary Roman life. Foremost among them were the Lares and Penates, guardian spirits of the household. The Lars protected the home and family, often thought of as ancestral spirits who lingered near the hearth. The Penates, on the other hand, safeguarded the pantry and food supply. Together, they were honoured at small shrines, usually placed in the atrium or kitchen, with daily offerings of wine, incense, or bits of bread. These were not grand or dramatic rituals. They were quiet, habitual, and deeply personal, a soft gesture to unseen protectors. Each Roman home also had a genius, a kind of personal spirit or divine double that accompanied every individual. The genius of a man and the Juno of a woman represented one's inner essence or soul force. On birthdays and major life events, a family might offer a libation to a person's genius, asking for health, strength, and fortune. In this way, even the self had a sacred reflection in the Roman religious worldview. Outside the home, spirits abounded. The Janus, god of doorways and beginnings, presided over transitions, both physical and metaphorical. With his two faces, one looking forward and one looking back, Janus governed entrances, exits, gates, and time itself. He was invoked at the start of wars, harvests, and New Year's. His temple in Rome famously had doors that were kept open in times of war and shut during peace, a barometer of the state's affairs. In the fields and countryside, the Romans revered Faunus, a rustic god of fertility, nature, and prophetic dreams. He was akin to the Greek Pan, often imagined as half man, half goat, roaming the woodlands and whispering wisdom through dreams. His festival, the Lupercalia, was an ancient and somewhat wild celebration of fertility, purification, and perhaps even early forms of Valentine's traditions. Similarly, Silvanus watched over forests and uncultivated lands, and Terminus marked and protected property boundaries. Even the Maena, the spirits of the dead, were honoured with small offerings at family tombs and on special days like the Parentalia, a week-long festival in February dedicated to the ancestors. This connection with the dead was not morbid, but reverent, a reminder of lineage and continuity. The Romans also acknowledged gods and spirits of highly specific functions. There were deities for sowing seed, Saya, for hoeing soil, Sarator, for the sprouting of crops, Vavacta, and even for weeding, Runcina. Such figures rarely had elaborate myths or temples, but they reflected Rome's agrarian roots and the belief that every stage of life and labour had a divine presence. In cities, people turned to Fortuna, goddess of luck and chance, whose wheel turned fortunes from wealth to ruin and back again. Her image adorned coins and amulets. People sought her favour before gambling, travel, or major decisions. Her temples were many, from the grand shrine of Fortuna Primigenia in Praeneste to small altars in urban neighbourhoods. There was Spes, the goddess of hope, and Fides, the goddess of trust and good faith, important values in contracts, diplomacy, and daily relationships. There was Concordia, goddess of harmony, and Pax, goddess of peace, often invoked by emperors, wishing to show that the gods blessed their reigns. All of these spirits, minor gods, and divine principles made Roman religion deeply integrated into the lives of its people. Worship was not something reserved for rare temple visits, but a daily, lived experience, carried out through gestures, habits, and deeply ingrained respect for the unseen world. It is this layering of grand and humble, public and personal, that gave Roman religion its complexity and endurance. In the next part, we will explore how the Roman state used religion not just to communicate with the gods, but to manage power, identity, and imperial control across a sprawling empire. As Roman religious life continued to develop, so too did the prominence of certain deities whose roles in civic, domestic, and military life grew ever more formalised. One such god was Neptune, the Roman equivalent of the Greek Poseidon. Neptune held dominion over the sea, but unlike his Greek counterpart, he was also regarded as a god of freshwater and horses. His role in Roman religion was somewhat more subdued, but sailors, traders, and naval commanders would still make offerings to Neptune before voyages. The Neptunalia, a festival celebrated in the heat of July, involved the building of makeshift shelters from branches, drinking water in abundance, and giving thanks for the life-sustaining power of springs, rivers, and aquifers, a reflection of Rome's profound dependence on water management. Vulcan, the Roman god of fire, volcanoes, and metalworking, was both a feared and respected figure. As the divine blacksmith, Vulcan was said to forge weapons and armour for the gods, and his forges were imagined deep beneath the earth, within the belly of volcanoes. His worship, however, was tinged with apprehension. Romans understood fire's destructive potential all too well, particularly in the densely built neighbourhoods of the city, and so Vulcan's festival, the Vulcanalia, involved symbolic acts meant to placate his temper. Bonfires were lit, and small animals such as fish and calves were thrown into the flames as offerings, an ancient attempt to draw fire's wrath away from homes and hearths. Then there was Apollo, one of the few deities directly borrowed from Greek mythology without a name change. While Apollo's cult was primarily Greek in origin, he found a lasting home in the Roman pantheon. He was the god of prophecy, healing, music, and the sun, and his temple on the Palatine Hill was one of the most prominent religious sites in Rome. Apollo's connection to Augustus was also politically significant. The first emperor saw himself as divinely favoured by Apollo and used the association to legitimise his rule. Festivals such as the Ludi Apollinares, featuring games and theatrical performances, were introduced during wartime in hopes that Apollo would bring health and victory. Closely linked to Apollo was his sister Diana, the goddess of the hunt, the moon and wild places. Diana had an independent and ancient cult presence in Roman religion, long before Greek influence. Her most famous sanctuary was at Lake Nemi, just outside of Rome, where she was worshipped as Diana Nemorensis. This grove became the site of a mysterious and violent priesthood, in which the reigning priest, known as the Rex Nemorensis, could only be replaced by a challenger who succeeded in killing him. Despite this macabre tradition, Diana was also seen as a protector of women and childbirth, and she held a softer, maternal aspect in many Roman households. Ceres, the goddess of agriculture and grain, represented one of the most fundamental aspects of Roman life. The success of Rome was inextricably tied to the fertility of its fields, and Ceres was honoured accordingly. The Cerealia, held in April, celebrated the renewal of life and crops. The rituals often included symbolic chases and games, as well as offerings of spelt and wheat. The plebeians, Rome's lower classes, particularly revered Ceres, as they were most directly dependent on the land. Her temple on the Aventine Hill was one of the centres of plebeian political life, blending religion and class identity in profound ways. The Romans also venerated Mercury, the fleet-footed god of commerce, messages, and travellers. Mercury, with his winged sandals and caduceus staff, was essential in a society where trade routes extended across the Mediterranean and beyond. Merchants, messengers, and thieves all looked to Mercury for favour. The Mercuralia, held in May, involved merchants sprinkling water from the sacred well of Mercury onto their heads and wares, a symbolic purification to bless transactions and ensure good fortune. His figure stood at crossroads and market squares, ever watchful, ever in motion. Bacchus, the Roman version of Dionysus, was the god of wine, revelry, and ecstatic liberation. His cult was one of the most controversial in Roman history. The Bacchanalia, originally small private rites, grew in popularity and secrecy. The Senate, fearful of the moral looseness and political conspiracies that might brew under Bacchus's influence, cracked down on these gatherings in 186 BCE with a famous decree, the Senatus Consultum de Bacchanalibus, which restricted Bacchic worship and curtailed its rites. Yet Bacchus endured, especially among those seeking release from the rigid norms of Roman decorum. He remained a symbol of both excess and release, a god who blurred the line between order and chaos. One must not forget Janus, unique among the Roman gods for being exclusively Roman and without a Greek counterpart. Janus was the god of doorways, beginnings, endings, and transitions. He had two faces, one looking forward and one looking back, a visual metaphor for his domain over time and passage. He was invoked at the start of all endeavours, military or civic, and was especially honoured at the beginning of each year. The month of January bears his name. His temple in the Roman Forum was left open during times of war and shut during peace, a silent stone barometer of the empire's state of affairs. And then there was Vesta, the goddess of the hearth home and the continuity of Rome itself. Her sacred fire, guarded by the Vestal virgins, was never allowed to go out, as it symbolized the eternal life of the city. The Vestals, chosen as young girls and sworn to celibacy for 30 years, held a unique and powerful place in Roman society. They could pardon prisoners and owned property, unusual for women of the time. Vesta's temple was round, symbolizing the hearth, and located in the very heart of the forum. Her presence was quiet, domestic, but deeply essential, a reminder that Rome's strength began in the home, not just on the battlefield. With these major gods firmly established, Roman religion provided not only a cosmology, but a framework for understanding the rhythms of life: birth, war, peace, planting, governance, death. But the world of Roman deities did not end here. Beyond the Olympian-style gods stood a vast array of minor deities, household spirits, and foreign cults, each woven into the complex religious tapestry of Roman life. Beyond the towering figures of Jupiter, Juno, Mars, and the rest of Rome's principal deities, there existed a vast, intricate web of lesser gods, spirits, and divine forces, entities not necessarily personified or adorned with myths, but deeply embedded in the practical and emotional rhythms of Roman life. These were the gods of the threshold, of the cupboard, of the fields and furrows, quiet presences felt in everyday rituals and honoured more for their constancy than their grandeur. Among the most universally honoured were the Lars and Penates, the household gods. The Lars were protective spirits of the home and family, believed to be ancestral in origin, watching over the house and its people. Small shrines to the Lares, called Lararia, stood in the corners of Roman homes, often near the kitchen or main hearth. These shrines typically featured small statues, sometimes accompanied by painted scenes of the family making offerings. Daily rituals to the Lares included offerings of wine, food, or incense, small gestures that kept the spirit of protection close. On festive days, or during important transitions such as weddings or departures, the family might perform more elaborate rites, asking the Lares to bless their journey or shield their loved ones from misfortune. The Penates, often mentioned alongside the Lares, were the gods of the pantry and provisions, keepers of food, wealth, and the daily necessities of life. While their exact origins and distinctions from the Lares blurred over time, the Penates were invoked during meals and family gatherings, forming part of the sacred bond between sustenance and gratitude. For Romans, the acts of eating, preparing meals, and storing grain were never entirely mundane. They were acts wrapped in quiet reverence, underscored by the presence of divine watchers. Genius, another deeply personal spirit, referred to the divine essence of an individual, a guiding force tied to one's vitality and destiny. Every man had a genius, and every woman a Juno, each unique and tied to the person's being. On birthdays, Romans would make offerings to their genius or Juno in private, often involving incense, garlands, or simple libations. The concept extended beyond individuals. Households, cities, and even legions were thought to have a genius loci, or guardian spirit, connected to their unique nature. The emperor himself had a public genius to whom loyalty was sworn, part of the early seeds of what would become the imperial cult. Agriculture, the bedrock of Roman civilization, inspired its own pantheon of lesser gods, each responsible for a particular step in the cycle of planting and harvest. There was Terminus, the god of boundaries and property markers, whose simple stone altars stood at the corners of farms and estates. At the annual Terminalia festival, Romans would crown these boundary stones with garlands and offerings of cakes and wine, reinforcing not just legal ownership, but a spiritual respect for land limits. Then came gods like Robagus, who protected crops from disease and blight. At the Robigalia, celebrated in late April, priests would offer the entrails of a sacrificial dog and incense to ward off mildew and rust that could destroy the grain harvest. These rituals were practical as well as spiritual, deeply tied to the agrarian calendar and anxieties of a world at the mercy of weather and time. Vervactor, Reparator, Inciter and Obarator were some of the many functional gods listed by writers like Varro and Columella, each assigned to a specific action in the farming process, turning the soil, repairing fields, planting seeds. While these deities did not inspire temples or statues, their names were spoken during prayers and rural festivals, subtle acknowledgements of the divine hands guiding every furrow and furrower. Another god, Pomona, stood out for her gentle stewardship of fruit and orchard trees. Unlike many other Roman gods, Pomona had no Greek counterpart. She was a uniquely Roman figure of peace, cultivation, and horticulture. Her temples were serene, and her stories few, but her presence could be felt in the quiet tending of gardens, in the scent of ripened figs and apples heavy with summer sun. Meanwhile, Faunus, the rustic spirit of forest and field, played a more mischievous role. He was both feared and welcomed, a fertility god whose presence could bless livestock and crops, but whose sudden appearances in lonely glades gave rise to whispered tales of strange noises and wild ecstasy. His festival, the Lupercalia, involved young men racing through the streets with goatskin thongs, striking women in hopes of increasing fertility. Though the ritual faded with time, its primal energy, chaotic, carnal, half wild, marked one of the more unusual faces of Roman piety. Roman religion was also deeply receptive to foreign cults, particularly as the empire expanded. Gods from Egypt, Asia Minor, and even Persia found homes in the hearts of Roman citizens. One of the most prominent was Isis, the Egyptian mother goddess, whose worship crossed cultural lines with ease. Her rituals, drawn from Nile traditions, were rich with incense, processions, and sacred music. Temples to Isis could be found from Pompeii to London, sanctuaries of healing and rebirth for those disenchanted with the sternness of the state gods. Likewise, the Persian god Mithras attracted many followers, particularly among soldiers. Mithraism was a mystery religion, its rites and teachings kept secret from outsiders. Worship involved initiation, sacred meals, and symbolic trials. The god Mithras depicted slaying a cosmic bull in dark, cave-like shrines known as Mithraea, represented triumph over darkness, loyalty, and masculine virtue. Though never fully integrated into the state religion, Mithraism flourished in the 2nd and 3rd centuries CE as a private, brotherly devotion. In a similar way, Cybele, the great mother from Phrygia, drew in Romans with her intense, ecstatic rites. Her priests, known as Galli, were eunuchs, often seen in flamboyant dress and engaged in music, dance and self-flagellation. Her worship stood at the edges of Roman norms, pushing the boundaries of gender, devotion and ritual. Yet Cybele held official temples and was even recognised as a protector of the city during times of war. Through all these layers, the mighty gods of Olympus, the gentle spirits of the home, the humble divinities of farmland and field, and the foreign powers that arrived on Roman ships, the Roman religious system formed a mosaic. It was not cohesive in doctrine or bound by centralized texts. Instead, it was lived in household shrines, in whispered prayers, in the rhythms of festival and sacrifice. In every part of Roman life, whether public or private, sacred or mundane, there was a place for the gods. And in honouring them, Romans shaped not only their understanding of the divine, but their place in a vast, ever-changing world. As the Roman Empire expanded and its institutions grew more centralised, religion too began to shift, subtly at first, and then with increasing weight. While traditional gods still held their place in temples, festivals and prayers, a new presence began to grow in importance, the emperor himself. Not merely a ruler, but a figure increasingly wrapped in sacred authority. What began as reverence for leadership would, over time, develop into a new religious form, the imperial cult. The roots of emperor worship were already present in Roman tradition. After all, heroes, kings and founders like Romulus had long been honoured as more than men. And in the eastern provinces, particularly in Egypt and Asia Minor, it was common for rulers to be regarded as divine or semi-divine beings. As Rome absorbed these regions, it inherited their religious customs. The Senate's decision to deify Julius Caesar after his assassination marked a turning point. Declared Divus Julius the Divine Julius, he became the first Roman to officially join the ranks of the gods. This move served both political and spiritual purposes. By making Caesar a god, Rome sanctified the new age and gave Augustus, his adopted son, the title Divi Filius, the son of a god. Augustus, cautious and politically astute, avoided calling himself a god during his lifetime. Instead, he encouraged worship of his genius and permitted temples to be built in his honour in the provinces, especially in the east. After his death, he too was deified by Senate decree, and from then on it became tradition for emperors to receive divine honours posthumously, if their rule had been accepted and their memory favourable. The imperial cult did not replace traditional religion. Jupiter, Mars and Vesta remained, but alongside them stood altars, statues and priesthoods dedicated to the emperors. Temples to Augustus rose in Gaul, Asia and North Africa. Roman citizens might offer incense before a statue of the emperor's genius, or recite oaths of loyalty invoking his name. The cult was especially important in the provinces, where it functioned as a tool of unity, a shared ritual of allegiance that reminded all peoples, from Britannia to Syria, of their place within a vast sacred order. In the city of Rome, the Ara Pacis Augustae, the altar of Augustan peace, stood as a symbol of this blending of piety and politics. Its delicate carvings depicted the imperial family not as conquerors, but as high priests, guardians of tradition, bringers of peace and almost divine in dignity. Statues of emperors appeared with divine attributes, a bare chest like Mars, a globe of dominion, or a laurel wreath, reinforcing the idea that the emperor stood between the human and divine. Some emperors embraced this role more dramatically. Caligula, for instance, demanded divine honours in his lifetime and referred to himself as a living god. Domitian preferred to be addressed as Dominus et Deus, Lord and God. Others, like Trajan and Hadrian, allowed deification after death, leaving the process to Senate approval and public sentiment. Over time, the line between man and god in imperial representation became increasingly blurred, until devotion to the emperor became one of the most common and visible forms of public religion. Yet even as this imperial religion rose, there were other changes underway, subtle, persistent, and ultimately transformative. Foreign cults continued to thrive in Roman cities, especially among the lower classes, and those searching for more personal or mystical forms of worship. Mystery religions, which offered secret rites, salvation, and a more intimate relationship with the divine, began to attract followers across the empire. The cult of Isis, for example, provided a goddess who listened, who healed, and who promised renewal. Her temples, filled with incense, music, and priests in flowing robes, offered a striking contrast to the austerity of Roman civic religion. Mithraism, with its cryptic symbolism and all-male membership, spread through the ranks of the Roman army, especially along the frontiers. The god Mithras, who slew the cosmic bull and held dominion over truth and loyalty, appealed to soldiers who lived by oaths and hierarchy. And then gradually and quietly came a new sect, Christianity. What began as a small group of Jewish followers of Jesus in the eastern provinces slowly spread westward. Early Christians, unlike followers of most Roman cults, refused to worship the emperor or any Roman gods. They held their meetings in private homes and underground chambers, practiced baptism and communal meals, and spoke of resurrection, salvation, and a single, all-powerful deity. To Roman authorities, this refusal to participate in the imperial cult or traditional sacrifices seemed like subversion, not just religious, but political. Persecutions followed, especially during the reigns of emperors like Nero, Decius, and Diocletian. Christian martyrs were thrown to beasts in the amphitheatres, burned alive, or executed for defying imperial edicts. And yet Christianity endured. Its emphasis on compassion, eternal life, and equality before God spoke to many, especially slaves, women, and the poor. By the early 4th century, the empire was changing. Emperor Constantine, after reportedly seeing a vision of the Christian cross before battle, issued the Edict of Milan in 313 CE, granting legal tolerance to Christianity. By the end of the century, under Theodosius I, Christianity became the official state religion, and the old temples began to close. The Roman gods, once worshipped in marble halls, honoured with garlands and chants, carried in festival processions, gradually faded into memory. Their names would live on in literature, art and architecture. Jupiter gave way to the Christian god. Vesta's flame was extinguished. The Capitoline temples became churches, and Rome, ever adaptive, became not just the heart of empire, but the seat of the Catholic Church, a new spiritual centre built atop the stones of the old. Yet even now, traces of the Roman gods remain, in the names of planets and months, in the ruins of temples, in the stories we tell of gods and mortals, thunderbolts and prophecy, war and love. Their echoes linger, quiet, patient, eternal, reminders of a world once filled with divine presence at every turn. And so, as the stars rise over the ancient hills and the streets of old Rome fall silent, we leave behind the temples, the prayers, the quiet flicker of sacred fires. The gods of Rome, in all their strength, mystery and splendour, belong to a world where the divine walked beside the daily. Their stories remind us not only of belief, but of the rhythms and hopes of those who once lived by their light. May their memory carry you gently into rest, and may sleep come to you calm and deep. Good night.